Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I want to talk about Series 2, or more specifically, modern Series 2 card sets. The reason I have to specify this is because in the vintage era, the card sets were released in multiple series, but they weren't really Series 1 and Series 2 as much as they were groups of cards that were unveiled over time. So you had the first series, second series, third series, fourth series. And the reason that they did that was because for a young kid, it's difficult to comprehend a large card set. It's also difficult for a kid to necessarily think that they can afford a large card set. So when you're talking in the 1940s and the 1950s, it was tough for kids to come across money. So it was often returning bottles and getting whatever change they can. And they could either get cards or they could get gum that was worth chewing, or, money was fairly precious for kids. And so even though card packs were inexpensive, still a kid had to comprehend the value of collecting those cards. Now, the age of kids collecting cards used to be very young. And so that's really who was being catered to. And when you're really young, the idea of a large card set like a 264 card set could seem really daunting. The spirit of cards was very centered. So you didn't have card shows and you didn't have price guides with the history of sports cards with the checklists that show you how big the card sets. The tradition of cards at the time was still quite primitive. So for a kid, it was just kind of something that he did for a couple of years. And you wanted to make sure that you could capture their attention, but also allow them to wrap their heads around what they were doing. So like I said, a 264 card set, well, what if they were trying to collect this out with 5-cent packs where they open the first pack and they have one card in the first 50 cards, one card in the second 50, third, fourth, and fifth. These cards are separated by anywhere from 40 to 60 numbers. They have card 26 and then they have card 87. That's not a card set. Those are random cards. You get 2 more card sets, you still can't see the set. And that can scare kids off in a hurry. So if you instead said, we're just going to release 32 cards at a time, or 64, then for a 32 card set, even though that is just the beginning of the set, still a kid goes to the store, gets 3 packs, they get 15 cards, and that's almost half of the set. They get 3 more packs and they're close to finishing the set. Get a couple more packs, and now they've probably finished the first 32 cards, and this gives them the ability to see the set unfurl in front of their eyes, because then after a couple of weeks they go to the store and guess what? Now there's a whole new set of packs. It is the second series that start with card 33 and go through card 64. And so now they get some more packs, and slowly the card set gets bigger and bigger because their focus is on small increments. So having multi-series releases was really smart at the time because it didn't seem expensive. It seemed attainable. It seemed like you were actually making progress. And so a kid would eventually, they get 40, 50, 60 packs maybe, and they get a big card set, but they don't realize it because they're just doing little groups. Even through the 1960s, they did this. And it wasn't until the 1970s that Topps finally went, you know what? I think we can just trust these kids with, here's the card set, go ahead and collect them. And that was smart in part because the way that the card sets or the way that the card boxes were released to the public wasn't uniform. By the time you get to the end of the baseball card season, you're already going to the football card season. So for a lot of kids, they're not even collecting baseball cards at the end. They're now collecting football cards. If it's a place like Chicago or Pittsburgh, those are wonderful football towns, which means that it's very likely that the baseball cards just don't mean as much. So for a lot of kids, they never were able to collect the high series releases, those ones at the end. And in many cases, somebody might not even stock them because they just figure, well, the football cards are out now, so why collect or why bother with the baseball cards? So some kids might not have ever gotten an opportunity to collect the cards from late in the year. And then other places might not have a lot of opportunity to get cards, and so most of the ones they would get would be late release cards that weren't as popular in other areas, in which case all they're collecting is the late series cards. So that meant that the way that kids collected, or the way that kids were able to collect a complete set was not uniform across the country. So by the 1970s, Topps figured, all right, these kids have it down. They can comprehend a whole 500 card set. So we're just going to release all the cards at one time in packs, and we're going to trust they're going to buy the 40, 50, 60 packs it takes to finish the whole set, which means everywhere you went, every kid was able to collect all the cards from card number 1 to whatever the card set ended with. It created that uniformity that was such a standard part of the tradition of collecting cards, because when you're collecting in series, you don't know where the end is, and you don't know if you've come to the end. Now you can actually comprehend that. And it became so standard that by the 1980s, kids were not only collecting the big Topps set, but also the Fleer set and the Donruss set. They were collecting 660 card sets and a 792 card behemoth. They could wrap their heads around all of those daunting tasks, all from the same packs. You got all the cards out of the same Fleer packs, the same Donruss packs, and out of the same Topps packs. Even to the point where they started releasing box sets, starting with Topps Traded and then with Fleer Update, and then eventually Score would launch with Score Supplemental, which meant that kids would complete their 792 card Topps set and then go out and buy a 132 card box set with the same card designs of special cards of players who are now becoming really popular and were going to become the new big stars of the next year. They could do that. They could pull all of that off. So there was no reason to truncate these cards because they sold and sold and sold, and even the box set sold. By 1988, that was just standard. You had your Topps set, your Donruss set, your Fleer set. You now had Score. If you wanted, you could do Sport Flicks as well, and all of the extra cards. There was no reason to truncate the card sets. It was just one big shot, and they just sold all through the year. 1989, things started to change. Topps released Bowman, which they figured would be like Score from the previous year. It'd just sell. The problem is, baseball collectors now got a second set in the same year, which had happened in 1981, but now with Upper Deck, it crowded the market that was already crowded, but it was also very daunting because it was expensive. Oh man, these cards were expensive. Every single pack cost twice as much, and they had less cards. Not 15 cards, they had 12. And the card set was even bigger than Topps. Topps was 792, Upper Deck was 800, but still a few more cards in the card set, fewer cards in each pack, more expensive packs. Each card cost almost 3 times as much on average in Upper Deck packs. And so that meant that if a kid wanted to collect all of the stuff, oh my word, it was going to be a lot of work. And so now tackling these big daunting tasks, or these big daunting sets, was now starting to become kind of daunting. You had to start to pick and choose. But Upper Deck did something interesting in 1989, where they followed the model of Topps, Fleer, and Score by releasing their own, what they called high series. And high series was a term that was used in Topps in the 60s and 70s for that last release. Well, Upper Deck used it to extend their card set in a way that the other 3 companies hadn't, because whether it was Topps Traded with their T-numbered cards, or Fleer Update with their U-numbered cards, or Score Supplemental with their S-numbered cards, all those card sets started over numerically with 1 and went to 110 or 132, however many cards. In the case of Upper Deck, they decided to pick up with 801. So their special 100 card set, the high series, was literally a 100 card set that took their main set and extended it. The Topps set was kind of that way, except the 792 card set, you had an extra 132 cards, which was 924 total cards between all of that, but numerically it didn't seem like that. With Upper Deck, they just said, yeah, we're going all the way out to 900. And you could buy it as a box set, but you could also buy it in packs, which is interesting, where they would continue to release their Upper Deck set, which Topps, Fleer, and Donruss were doing as well. But now you could get the late release cards that also have these extra high series cards tucked into those packs as well at a higher rate. But still, you got 800 cards and then an additional 100 cards packed into these packs. It was kind of shoehorned in, but it meant that card collectors could continue to collect their regular Upper Deck set and also get these special cards as well on top of that. So it was ambitious, and in 1990 they would actually add insert cards into packs to help encourage people to collect these packs. But this wasn't a Series 2. This was more cards tacked onto the end. Over in football, something else happened. In football, Topps released, once again, their 396 card set. Score launched in football with a 330 card set, which was perfect because the 396 card Topps set was half the size of baseball. In Score, their 660 card baseball set, well, now they had a 330 card football set. But they had competition because Pro Set launched as a brand new standalone company, just like with Upper Deck. They were a football-only company, and their card set was a 440 card set, which by baseball standards is a joke. By football standards, that was big. But it was an unadorned set. They didn't have any league leaders. They didn't have any Pro Bowlers. There was nothing special in the card set. It was straightforward. It was Atlanta through Washington. The only thing special is that every single set, or every single team set, ended with a coach. So that was the big difference. But otherwise, it was just 440 cards of veteran players and coaches just laid right out. But then they released a Series 2. Now, the Series 2 came in hybrid packs like Upper Deck High Series. So most of the cards in the set were actually the veteran cards from the first series. The additional 100 card Series 2 cards were laced into those packs at a pretty healthy rate. But they were done in a different way. They were done with a different color. And the color wasn't wildly different like Score Supplemental would be done with. Instead, this was a card that looked like it was not intended to fit in with the rest of the cards in the set, because the veteran cards had 4 different colors, but they were scattered all over. So you'd have a series of one color and then a series of another color, series of another color, and then they were repeating. And so the colors were all sporadic. Here, all the cards were a bright red color. But it was the way the card set was laid out, because it had veteran players who were either players who'd changed teams or players who hadn't made it into the first series, like the Fridge. Then it was draft pick rookies, something Score had already done in their main release set. Here, Pro Set did the beginning of the first draft, but instead of having portrait shots, they had action shots that had to be in college uniforms because they wanted to get these cards out pretty early. And then they had prospect cards, which means that their Series 2 set, one, looked like a distinct creation that was intended to be its own existence, its own package. But it was also laid out sequentially so that you went through a progression through the card set. And as if that wasn't enough, they also did an update set for Pro Set, which was a card set that you could either send away and get, which included a title card and a checklist, or for late release Series 2 packs, that became an extension to Series 2. So it was intended to be kind of a 3-part set. They intended a 440 card base set, a 100 card Series 2 set, and then they also had some extra cards at the end were kind of like their version of Score Supplemental. So this card set actually had complexity to it, but it was done in groups. A pretty unique approach, but that meant that it was a distinct, thought-through Series 2 release, even though it was not numerous enough to be released in just in their own packs. Now, NBA Hoops did kind of a hybrid between the two. They also did a Series 2, which was cards released with the main series. But then, interestingly, in 1990, we got our first opportunity to have standalone distinct packs of Series 1 and Series 2. Now, to be fair, Topps had been releasing Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3 of their Topps big cards, but that was done in the 1950s model where you just had like 82 or 88 cards, and then you had the next numeric sequence and next numeric sequence. There was nothing different about the cards. For Leaf in 1990, when they launched with distinct Series 1 packs, just a portion of the set, and then for Series 2, it was a whole different number range. But the cards are identical in every possible way. There's no structure to the set. There aren't things that are going on. It's just more cards. So it's basically like taking one card set and just cutting it in half in separate packs. It was a smart move for them because the card market was really busy, and these cards were intended to compete with Upper Deck. Now, Upper Deck had already locked itself in place, so people were going to be buying those cards. Leaf was going to be expensive cards, so they right-sized the card set so you only focused on a smaller portion of the card set. You could collect those cards, spend the money, get used to it, and then when Series 2 came out, collect the rest of the cards. Interestingly, it was about making these card sets not as daunting for older collectors, whereas in the 1940s and 50s, it was for younger collectors, still following a similar model. So it's technically Series 1 and Series 2 packs, but it wasn't built to be two series. Now we get back to football. In 1990, in football, we got our first serious, real Series 2 that was right out of the gate designed to be a unique Series 2. Now I'm going to start off with Score, even though Score should be the one that follows, but it's not as interesting, so I'm going to start off with it. For Series 1 in 1990, they did a 330 card set, exactly the same as the previous year in football. In this case, they had three border colors, that's the way they released their card sets. Every 110 cards had a different color border, and then with their supplemental set, that would be a different color as well. So they had their three colors, veterans, and then the veterans started the third series, and then they had draft pick rookies before they were even drafted, and then they had two subsets. So the third series had a very distinct theme. Then their Series 2 packs started numerically at 331 and went out to 660. But the colors were the same, so it was like a repeat in terms of the visual presence of it, which meant that the cards actually did look like they were intended to be a replication of Series 1, which is a cool feature about this card set. They again have veteran cards in the first two series, and then just a couple in the third series, where the rest of the third series was, or excuse me, not third series, the rest of the third color was dedicated to draft pick rookies, to all-pro cards, to special release cards, to rookies. It was a very congested section of the card set where they just had a bunch of cool stuff to replicate what the 1989 set had been like. But the card set was intended to be as a Series 1 and Series 2, where they left players like Derek Thomas and Randall Cunningham to only appear as players in the second series. So Score, right from the outset, was thinking about building a card set so that as collectors, you would think about Series 1 and Series 2 as a whole, but you would experience them in a way that helped you to kind of feel comfortable with the second series. But Pro Set did something far more impressive. For the 1990 set, they started off Series 1 with league leaders. They even had some draft pick or some college award winners and then some Hall of Famers. And then they got into the teams, again with all of the coaches. And then they had the whole AFC Pro Bowl team. Well, almost the whole Pro Bowl team. I'm doing a separate video about the one card that doesn't fit into that. Then when you collect Series 2 packs, you have the NFC. And then you have the veteran players, including all of the AFC Pro Bowlers. So the Pro Bowl, everybody who was in the Pro Bowl, their main card was in the other set. Then after the veteran cards, you get to the draft pick players. And then the prospect cards, which might sound familiar. And then you get around to special subset cards, whether that's interesting events in the league, their newsreel cards. I think it was newsreel. And they had photo cards, and they even had a gap, a numeric gap for their update set that was a standalone, that was not released in packs this time. It was only a send away, but there was a spot in it to fit that in. The complexity of this card set was really impressive. But by separating into Series 1 and Series 2, it meant that for Series 1, they could get in early and give you the NFL as you knew it. And they added a couple of rookies, but they're in their college uniforms because it's about them being in college. Then they could wait on Series 2 so that by the time they came out, all the players were now in their NFL uniforms. And so this meant that it gave Pro Set the ability to build one card set where they focused on one portion and they had the foundation laid for the second series. Then by the time they got to finishing the second series, they could build it however they needed for later on in the card season. So this meant that now they were thinking in terms of a Series 1 and Series 2 and the way that they work together. And this would be not a direct model down the road because hardly anybody would ever do a complex, custom-built Series 1, Series 2 that look like they're supposed to be one series. But the whole mindset of the first wave and then the second wave and doing things special in the second series versus the first series, this was something that would be a big part of this. Now, interestingly, in 1991, football continued to be the main place where they had Series 1 and Series 2, but we were starting to see it in baseball as well, where we had Stadium Club and we also had Don Russ that were now doing multiple series. But in football, by the time we get into 1992 and 1993, we would lose almost all of the 2 series releases. In 1992, Score went down to a single release. In 1993, Upper Deck went down to a single release, which is funny because in 1992, they did their first Series 1 and Series 2 in football. It was also their only Series 1 and Series 2 in football, just for that 1 year. So football, because it was so congested with so many options, having big card sets released in Series 1 and Series 2 didn't make any sense. Baseball, however, was the polar opposite. And by the time you get to 1992, now card companies were usually thinking of doing a Series 1 and Series 2. Topps was done that way. Pinnacle was done that way. Obviously, we had Stadium Club and we had Leaf and we had Don Russ that were released in multiple series. So basically, Fleer was the holdout in 1992. I mean, even Score had shifted over, and it wouldn't be till 1993 that Fleer would be the last holdout to shift over to a Series 1 and Series 2 release, except for special high-end card sets. So that would become the model moving forward with baseball, and the reason is because for baseball, the congestion wasn't as nearly as bad as in football. Football, there was so much variety that you wanted to do kind of focused attacks of different card sets. In baseball, it gave you the ability to focus on collecting a 660 card set, 330 cards at a time. And so it allowed for collectors to not get scared away on these large sets, whereas over in football, you get bored because you're collecting that for a while, and then you want to move on to something else. And then I got to collect that too, but I got that and that and that and that, and that, all these other options. So, but it would still appear in football. Almost every single year there would be some set that would have multiple series, Series 1 and Series 2 usually, but it would be much less common. Whereas over in baseball and in basketball, 2 releases of cards would continue to be very much the norm for so much of the hobby. So it helped to reshape the hobby, but it did so for different reasons. The original reason was in order to have a bite-sized approach to building card sets. But in the modern era, it started off giving card companies the ability to have flexibility to where you could do something now and then you could do something else later. And you could do it in a way that the two feel like they were always supposed to be built this way from the beginning, which they kind of were. But then it evolved into being a way to reshape the size of the card sets as you were collecting them, especially in the insert era where more and more inserts were the things you were chasing. So you could have these inserts in Series 1, these in Series 2. You could focus yourself more into one portion of the hobby as you're trying to get all this stuff taken care of. And then you step away and you do another one and you can buy more packs because you're pursuing more cards and you don't even realize it. Pretty complex. And I don't even want to get into the weeds of exploring that anymore because this is enough. This is basically the story of Series 1 and Series 2 releases. Specifically Series 2, there were, again, some cases of Series 3 that would show up with Stadium Club and Topps, etc. but it's interesting to see how, especially how quickly it spun up, and the kind of the complexities that went into it. So yeah, that is the story of cardboard for Series 2. Thank you very much for watching. Now, if you do have any questions or any comments, that's what the comment section is for down below. I certainly check out other stories of cardboard that I've been doing over the years, if you haven't had the chance, as I slowly explore the history of sports cards, one subject at a time. Yeah, other than that, thank you very much for watching.